Hello, this is Porter Nielsen with Random Art Attack, and this is part 3 of the minigame tutorial series. In this section, we're going to be creating an aim and shoot script. So the two topics are basically the aim script. We're going to be doing rigid body rotations, transformations, and inputs. And topic 2 will be the shoot script, finding other scripts within one script, how to manipulate blend shapes. We're going to talk a little bit about mouse inputs and changing rigid bodies. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So we're going to go ahead and create some scripts. You can see that I created a script folder. I'm going to right-click, create C# script. I'm going to just name this aim. Nothing too creative, right? I'm going to go ahead and open this up in whatever program you want. You could be using MonoDevelop. I'm using Visual Studio. I'm going to go ahead and create a variable rigid body. So the first word is the variable type, and then the second is the variable name. Then I'm going to create a serialized field, camera. It's basically a private variable that you can see in Unity's editor. So this is going to be able to reference the rigid body, and we're going to be able to reference the camera. So in the start, I'm going to find this rigid body. So I'm going to set the variable rigid b equal to get component rigid body. What that's doing is it's basically going through and finding the rigid body on the game object that we attach the script to. So if we attach this to the camera, it's going to look for the rigid body on the camera if we put a rigid body on the camera. I also don't want the cursor visible when we play the game, so I'm going to do cursor.visible equals false. All right, now I'm going to create a new kind of a method that's going to deal with the aim logic, so I'm going to name it aim logic. I have very unique naming conventions. So I'm going to make a local variable, float underscore left right value. I'm going to set that equal to the input dot get access raw, and that's going to get me my mouse's input. So I have to say what I'm getting my mouse X, and that's it. So now I'm going to create another variable for the up and down using the same kind of principles. So float, this is going to be an up down value, and we're going to say input get raw access mouse Y. Now this is going to give me two different values, either between -1 to 1. So it's the left right value and the up down value. Now I'm going to go ahead and create two vectors that we can pass into the rotation. So we're going to call this rotation, I'm using underscore to let me know it's a local variable. I'm going to say equals new vector 3. So this vector 3 is going to equal new vector 3. And we need 3 values. So the X rotation, we actually want the up down value. Now as you play around with this, you can kind of see why. It's going to be rotating along the x-axis, and so the x-axis, if you pivot around that, will actually be moving up and down, up and down. If you take your finger and kind of make a horizontal line, that's your x-axis, and if you rotate it along that, you could see that would point up and down. The y rotation is going to be 0 in the x value, and then the left-right value will be the y. So it's almost inverted what you'd think, but if you actually draw the axes and try and turn around those axes, it would help you kind of see. So rigid body dot move rotation, and it takes the current rotation, and then we basically multiply it by the new rotation. So rigid body dot rotation, so it's current rotation. I'm going to go ahead and times this by a quaternion, because rotations are in quaternion, so I need to change these vector 3s to basically a quaternion. So quaternion Euler dot rotation y. Okay, so that's going to move the camera left or right. Now, we want to rotate it up or down, so we're actually not going to rotate the rigid body. We're going to rotate the camera. If you try to rotate the rigid body at the same time, it gives you some interesting errors. So I'm going to do cam transform.rotate rotation x / divide by 3, because I actually like the up down to be a little bit less than 100%. So I'm going to compile that, go back to Unity, go to my player, and attach the script. And so, first of all, I actually do need a rigid body. I'm going to turn off gravity, and now I'm going to put the aim script, because the aim needs the rigid body. It needs a camera, so I drag and drop the camera in. Now, you could have said get component children camera like this, so we don't have to drag and drop it. and that would actually just automatically propagate it, so we didn't have to drag and drop that. Now nothing's happening, so there's obviously an error. I have the aim logic, but it's never calling this function. So in update, which is called every frame, we're going to do aim logic. Now let's go ahead and run this. So we see the left and right is moving perfectly, and then the up and down is moving the way we want. Now it's invert though. As I move the mouse up, it goes down, and vice versa. So left and right, the rigid body is moving, and then the up and down is the camera. So two different things are moving, rigid body and the camera. And now I'm just going to kind of look around the train, see how I like it. A little sparse, I could kind of spruce it up a little bit, but it's looking decent. So I just went ahead and paused this. So now you can see that it's rotating the camera and the rigid body. You can actually see that in the scene view. So part of your homework is you're going to be trying to make it so it's actually just doing both at the same time. In the move rotation, instead of just doing the left-right, I want the move rotation to control both the up and down and the left-right. See why I didn't do it that way. So basically try it yourself and see. So get rid of the camera transform in your homework and see if that messes it up, and try and figure out why I did that. So anyways, let's create a new script. Let's call this shoot. Need to add a bow and arrow. So drag that bow into the player, and then drag the arrow into the bow. Now I need to go to the bow and move it so that the camera can see it. The camera's clipping it a little bit, so I'm going to change the clipping to like 0.001, so it's not going to clip it at all. I'm going to move it off to the side like that. Don't move the camera. I accidentally moved the camera there. That's bad. So I kind of want it down like this. And I don't have any cursor or anything like that, so it's going to kind of be fun where it's just aiming. And I'm removing all these things off the arrow because the arrow is actually going to be a spawn location for us. And so I'm not actually going to be running that arrow's physics. I'm going to be instantiating different arrows on that arrow. But since that arrow was exactly where we wanted, it was good. So I'm going to put a shoot script on this arrow. And the shoot script's basically going to be loading new arrows onto it and releasing them. So go into the shoot script. So first thing I want is just to limit the number of arrows. I don't want an infinite number of arrows, so I'm going to go serialize field. Let's call this integer number of arrows. And I'm going to say 10. Super creative names, right? Now I want to think about whether or not an arrow is slotted. So I'm going to say Boolean, which is a true-false statement. Arrow slotted equals false. So I'm saying there isn't an arrow slotted at the start of the game. So I'm going to try and spawn if there's not an arrow slotted. So in the start method, I want to spawn an arrow basically. So we need to create a new method. Let's go ahead and go void because I'm not returning anything. Spawn arrow. And the first thing we want to do is if number of arrows is greater than 0, then we want arrow slotted equals true. So every time we spawn this, if we have enough arrows, it'll start going through this logic. Arrow is slotted is true. So I need another serialized field here. Let's call it a game object, and that's arrow prefab, the thing that we're going to be instantiating. Okay. We also want a serialized field, game object, arrow. So this arrow is basically going to be a variable that points to this, the instantiated object. So we're going to say arrow equals instantiate. So it takes three things. The object to the prefab, so arrow prefab, the position, so I'm going to say transform.position, and the rotation, so transform.rotation. And we need to instantiate it as a game object, so we say a as game object. So now let's go through this. arrow is the variable that is a game object, and we're saying this variable is a reference to this new arrow prefab that we just created. Okay? And we're instantiating at the position and the transform of this object, which is the arrow that we created and took away all the script from. So now this is going to spawn the arrow. So right from the get-go, we're going to spawn the arrow right there. Now, the next thing I want to do is I don't want to spawn the arrow just once. I want to be able to spawn the arrow every time I shoot one and click the mouse again. So creating a new method, shoot logic, if number of arrows is greater than 0 again. Okay. Now, within this, I kind of want to pull back the string, and so I need a, as I mouse down, I want to pull the string back. As I release the arrow, I want to shoot the arrow, get rid of the childness. So I'm going to go ahead and say arrow transform.parent equals transform. So I actually want the spawned arrow to be a parent of the bow. So that way, as I move the bow, it's going to move the arrow as well. We're going to do the physics of the arrow later. So we basically just, all we want is to be able to pull the bow back, let go, and to spawn a new arrow as we pull it back again. So we need a variable to track this pull mount. We don't need this to be serialized, so this can be a private variable. Float pull mount equals 0, because we're not pulling it at the start. So if pull mount is less than 100, pull mount equals 100. That doesn't look right. We'll probably go back and fix it. It should be if pull mount is bigger than 100. We want it to equal to 100, because I don't want pull mount to ever equal bigger than that. I'm going to make a skin mesh renderer, which affects the blend shapes. Call it bow skin. So I do bowskin.transform.getComponent skinned mesh render. So I need another serialized field here, calling it game object bow. So it's going to get the skinned mesh renderer from the bow and arrow. So let me show you this. If you click on the bow and arrow, skin mesh renderer has the pulled thing, which we want to be able to affect. So on the spawn position, we're going to put the shoot script, and it's good. We didn't compile it, so we don't have any access. A couple errors. We need there we go. We need another bracket here. And now it should compile just fine. So you can see this. We need an arrow prefab. We can go to the prefabs, drag that in. But as you can see, it kind of disappears there, so you can lock it so that as you drag things in, it won't change. So arrow prefab. The arrow is a pointer, so we don't want to change that. And the bow is right there. Okay. So now I have a reference to the skinned mesh renderer. I can't say that word. Is referenced. I'm just going to copy this and do arrow. Call this arrow skin. So I'm basically getting a skinned mesh renderer for the arrow as well, so that as we pull the string, we can affect the blend shape of both of these. So I'm going to go to a rigid body as well. Arrow rigid body equals arrow.transform.getComponent rigid body and parentheses there. So I also want to affect the rigid body of the arrow as I shoot. So now I'm going to do the logic for as I hold down the mouse button, the pull mount starts to increase, and it's going to affect the skinned mesh render, the blend shapes. I can't say that word, excuse me. Skinned mesh renderer. So if input capital I, go ahead and get mouse button, and now I want it to be just as I'm holding it, so I just leave it like that. So 0 is left, 1 is right, 2 is middle, excuse me. So this is the left mouse button, 0 is left, 1 is right, 2 is middle. So pull amount plus equals time.delta time times pull amount. Now, we made a pull amount and it was pretty, not pull amount, we want that to be pulse speed. We'll fix that later. If input.getMouse up at 0, we want pull amount to equal 0. Okay. So currently there's 2 errors. That should be greater than, and that should be where it says pull amount equal plus or minus time melted time. We're going to change that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the pulled. So I'm looking at that. That's the first element in the blend shape. So I go bowskin dot set blend shape weight. Now I need an index number, which is 0, and it's going to be the pull amount. Do the same thing for the arrow because I want them to be affected at the same time so that they move together. So set blend shape weight, 0 pull amount. Now we want to put them on the mouse button down, so as you're pulling this, it's doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and compile this, and we're going to see a few mistakes, which is good. We learn from mistakes, right? So as I pull, you can see nothing is happening. So a couple mistakes. First, I didn't put this in the update. So shoot logic, it needs to run this every single time. But even now, this isn't going to work perfectly, because you can see that it's going way too fast, and it's not working. And it's the very reason that we said before. So we're going to go ahead and problem solve through this. Number of arrows looks fine. Bow's looking fine, looking through this, and you'll have this happen all the time. As you make mistakes, go back through your script, try and figure out logically by just running through this. So I want this, like I said, to be a new variable. So I'm going to say serialize field, float, pull speed. That way I'm timesing it by a different variable. The bigger the number, the faster the pull amount's going to go up. If it's 1, time.delta time is basically going to be 1 second will equal 1. So let's change this to 10. And it's still doing it way too fast. Let's go ahead and look at why. And it's what we said at the very beginning. So now you can see how slow it pulls it back, but it's doing it correctly. So we could change the pull speed amount. Let's try 50. I actually like that. 100? I like 100 a lot better. That's probably as fast as you would pull back a real bow and arrow. Now, we want to do the logic behind getting the mouse button up. So I'm going to say arrow slotted equals false, because when we let up, it's going to release the arrow. So now that we want to affect the arrow body's rigid, the arrow's rigid body. So go arrow rigid body. Is kinematic equals false. So now physics can start to be applied to this. Now, what we want to do, as we're looking at this, we want to run this again because we're going to basically move it forward. Or I could just put it up here so it's always running it. Except if I have 0 arrows, it's going to be pulling it, so we don't want it there. And then if it's outside there, there's also an issue. So we're just going to have to do it twice. Or we could just actually do it at the end of the bracket. That way it doesn't matter which if statement we go to. It's just going to be pulling the blend shape. So that's good. We want to remove the transform from the rigid body. Or excuse me, the parent. So arrow transform.parent equals, no. So the arrow's root is itself. Number of arrows minus equals 1, so it's taking 1 arrow away from the number of arrows we have. Now you can see this isn't going to shoot the arrow, but it's going to make it so I can shoot the arrow because it's removing all the physics constraints. Let's go ahead and see this. Arrow prefab. Need to add a rigid body because we're going to be referencing this. Use gravity, yes. Is kinematic, yes. So physics isn't going to apply this until we turn that off, basically. And let's see what happens. So I pull this back, and you can see how slow that's going because we didn't change it. And you can see as soon as I release it, it basically drops it, but we do want to spawn a new arrow. So this is probably the last part that we need to do. So on mouse button up, we're doing this. What would be nice is not to automatically slot it, but maybe on a mouse down, right? On mouse down, it's going to spawn the new arrow. So if input.get mouse down, and we want the left button, excuse me, so it's 0. Now we don't want to double slot this, so we have to say and if arrow slotted equals false, or I could have said not with an exclamation mark in front of it, but whatever. So then I just spawn an arrow. That's it. So again, this is going to be going back way too slow. We're going to fix that later. But you can see it works. Change this to 100, I think is what we said. Yep. And you can see it spawns a new arrow. We're good to go. So just look at the arrow prefab there. Everything looks good. Oh, and you can see after we hit the 10 arrows, we run out. So for your homework, what I would like you to do is basically improve the aim script. So improve the aim script so that the look is inverted. So if I move up, I actually look up. If I move down, I actually move down, as opposed to the way we have it right now. Experiment with the aim function. Like I said previously in the tutorial, try and make it so that the X and the Y is being affected on the rigid body and not the camera. So just the rigid body. See how that affects it, and try and understand why I separate this to moving the left and right for the rigid body and the up and down to the camera, because there is method to my madness. And the last one, make it so that the look sensitivity is variable, so that I can change how fast I look up and down, or even left and right if you want to. And that's your homework. I hope you liked this video. It was fun to make. Go ahead and give us a like, subscribe if you'd like to. If you don't want to, it's a free country, right? You can do whatever you want to. And again, we appreciate your support. Check us out on Patreon, and I'll see you next time.